Thorgrim Grudgebearer, the High King, one of the most mediocre lord in the game. Not that he's useless, but because his functions are eclipsed by Thorek in every single way. His buffs, the High King and the Great Book of Grudges, is no match for the Rune of Doom and Rune of Speed, as well as the other Law of Rune spells from Thorek Ironbrow. And as a duelist, he is also worse in every single way. He is not as tanky due to the lack of physical resistance, and he does not have as much armor-piercing weapon strength as Thorek Ironbrow. While Thorek Ironbrow on his Anvil of Doom has the physical resistance to tank out damage and the armor-piercing to dish out the pain to the armored foes. But today we are still fielding the High King, as it is a challenge requested by Kurokuma is the best, and now I'm going to figure out how to make Thorgrim work. This might not be the most competitive build, but it still makes use of Thorgrim's abilities to support its army. So, normally you would see Thorgrim with a bunch of hammers trying to buff up their attack, hoping them to dish out as much damage as possible, but I think it actually requires something else to make Thorgrim work. Not with the elite damage dealing hammers, but with something slightly less good at offense. We have the Norgrimling Ironbreakers and also a couple Longbeards with great weapons as our elite units. As for the rest of the infantry, we have a bunch of miners with blasting charges, supported at the back by some rangers, one of them the Overlord Raiders, rangers with great weapons, and not exactly a damage dealing elite blob. We have the Grumbling God and the Longbeards with great weapons. Their attack stats are not the greatest, but buffed up by Thorgrim Grudgebearer up to 14 melee attack without the High King buff, a pretty decent stat overall. And supporting heroes, we have Runesmith and also Master Engineer. Now for our foes, we have a Tomb King's army with a whole bunch of skeleton warriors, some of them with spears, and one of them the King Nakash Scorpion Legion, protecting a box of artillery and missiles. With the Blessed Legion, we have the skeleton archers, a couple of Screaming Skulls catapults, Ushabti, a single Ushabti unit for a bit of more mass and anti-infantry armor-piercing damage, Ushabti with Great Bow to snipe out any large threats, including artillery, and at the back we have more skeleton warriors and a couple tomb gods to hold back the enemies as a bit of a sturdier backbone. And to buff up all those missile damage, we have a single High Queen Khalida on her snake, providing those missile damage buffs. And in the bushes, we have the Ambusher, 3 Nekara horsemen, very cost-effective mid-tier cavalry, will be great for harassing the backline and charging down rangers. And that's it for the army builds. Let's get the battle started, and I'll talk about the army build in a little bit more detail after the battle. With the lack of artillery, the miners, the Norgrimlings, and the rangers are all forward deployed, hoping to get into melee range or shooting distance as soon as possible, as these dwarfs are now pumping their dwarven legs, rushing forward. At the back, the great weapons, Longbeards will be following up, also the characters as well, trying to keep up with the main army. As for the Tomb Kings, they are raining down the Screaming Skulls onto the miners, doing some nice anti-infantry blasting damage. Also, the Nekara horsemen are rushing out of the tree lines, pushing in, trying to silence these miners before they can get out their blasting charges, as well as getting into the back line. With a clean charge into the miners, they can do some decent impact damage. However, some miners were able to throw in their blasting charges, and with only 50 armor, these horsemen has taken some damage in the charge. At the same time, the rangers who are at the back, not silenced by the Nekara horsemen, they are able to turn around and fire at the Nekara horsemen, who are now rather occupied by the Dawi units in front of them, chipping away the health of the skeleton cavalry. Meanwhile, the Norgrimlings are also busy with their own ranged attacks. Positioned right behind the front line, they're in the perfect spot to provide fire support to the minor units in front of them. However, on the other flank, the Dawi infantry are overloaded by a horde of skeletons, Ushabti, and High Queen Khalida. But they are buying time for these rangers at the back to silence, shoot down one of the Screaming Skull catapult, silencing half of the Tomb King's artillery fire, which is the biggest threat to my Dawi elite infantry. Speaking of which, one of the Longbeards with great weapons are now cutting through a bunch of skeleton infantry, while the Norgrimlings are using their shield and armor to absorb a ridiculous amount of skeleton archer fire, taking pretty much minimal damage throughout the whole process. Now in the front we have the Rangers now finally being tied down by all these skeleton spears and Ushabti. This is not a fight they want to be in, so in response the Grumbling God are activated to plug in the gap, pinning down all these skeleton and Ushabti with their superior melee defense. And with the Tomb King's army blobbing up, the Norgrimlings will be turning their backs towards the enemies and now throwing in the blasting charges, hoping to thin out the skeleton blob with their explosive damage. And that is not the only missile support for the Dawi. The Ulthus Raiders are now chugging in their armor-piercing throwing axes, attempting to snipe out High Queen Khalida, especially with that marked by Ulthar ability, stripping away Khalida's missile resistance and maximizing the throwing axe's damage. Especially thanks to the Rangers tying down Khalida, refusing to back down in battle thanks to the encouragement from the Longbeards. Over here we have one of the Longbeard units cutting through a unit of skeletons, now getting into some skeleton archers, and once they break these archers they will be able to get into the artillery and silence all the artillery fire from Tomb Kings once and for all. So Tomb Kings will be chugging in a bunch of the Nekara horsemen as well as some Tomb Gods units, hoping to break these stubborn Longbeards with a rear charge, but alas, they are the Dawi, they do not rout easily, and instead they probably would just cut through the archers, get into the artillery before actually routing. Now back to the front line, we have the Norgrimlings tying down a ridiculous amount of skeletons. Skeleton warriors, skeleton spears, one of them the Scorpion Legion, as well as a Tomb Guard unit. They only have half health right now, but they have been cutting through all these Tomb Kings unit with deadly efficiency, with 61 melee attack coming from Thorgrim's Great Book of Grudges as well as the High King ability. The constant plus 18 melee attack buff allows the Norgrimlings to power through the 41 melee defense of the Tomb Gods, slicing and dicing all these skeleton units with their axes and shields. On the far flank, some Rangers who have been routed is now regrouped, but they will be quickly charged down by the Nekral Horsemen, as these three units will be overwhelming this one unit of Rangers, while over here miners with blasting charges are hacking away at the skeleton warriors. In the front line, High Queen Khalida has been taking some massive damage from throwing axes and the Rangers. The Dawi crossfire has certainly added up some significant damage on the High Queen. There was an attempt to shut down these Ulthus Raiders with the summoned Ushabti, but distracted by the Runesmith, they certainly aren't doing a great job about it. And now, High Queen Khalida charging into the backs of the Norgrimlings, but that is not going to be enough to rout them. With still 46 leadership left, the Norgrimlings are holding with a bit of an ammo replenishment from the Master Engineer. The Norgrimlings are still holding firm in combat, and being on guard mode, they will be doing even more damage by throwing out blasting charges whenever there's any models free to do so. At the back, the Longbeards have finished off the catapults, while in the front, Khalida is going for a desperate assassination on Thorgrim. However, it has ended in failure as Khalida is finished off by a combination of Dawi units and also friendly fire. A massive loss for the Tomb Kings, and the army is now running out of steam. The army has lost their lord, the artillery is gone, and most of their units are depleted. Balance of power is now in favor of the Dawi. With a little bit of desperate attempt here, Nekara horsemen charging into the miners, breaking them, probably will be bouncing around the battlefield as well, trying to roll over all these ranged units of the Dawi, but still, the Ulthus Raider is a regiment of renown, and more importantly, a Dawi regiment of renown. They have some decent melee stats. They will instead be dragging down all these Nekara horsemen, especially with 37 attack buffed up by the High King ability. They will actually be doing some nice counter punching damage, although this boon would not be lasting long as the High King is now on 7 HP only. As the Ushabti with Great Bows, one last volley into Thorgrim's back will be finishing him off, but that is not a big deal right now as I do have the advantage here with the Norgrimlings still having 58 models left. They will be a tough force for the Tomb Kings to kill now, as the Ushabtis they ran out of ammo, while the skeletons also are running out of ammo. Not anything on the Tomb Kings army right now can threaten these elite defensive infantry of the Dawi. Also, the Grumbling Guard are still present, able to refresh the vigor of the surrounding units, providing also a leadership buff. The Ulthus Raiders will be able to stand their ground, awaiting the arrival of the Grumbling God, and with the superior infantry surrounding all these Ushabtis with great bows, they will be dragged down in melee combat, making it the last straw to break the leadership of the whole Tomb King's army. Now let's quickly talk about why we want Thorgrim with Ironbreakers or other defensive infantry. This is a battle between me and RTK Botman, a really good player. I lost this battle, but the Ironbreakers, the Norgrimlings, had a spectacular performance in this battle. Normally, Ironbreakers lack the offensive power. They have great defensive stats, but their melee attack is rather low, preventing them from making consistent contact against any mid to high tier units. But if you can deliberately damage Thorgrim and get the High King buff activated, now the Ironbreakers can have a consistent plus 18 melee attack buff, giving them a much better chance in overpowering the melee defense of their opponents. Combined with their impressive defense, they are able to grind out enemies in a prolonged fight. Just like here, the Grave Gods, despite being a mid-tier infantry, the Norgrimlings were still able to cut them down in droves. And throughout the whole process, they are taking minimal damage. Although I lost this battle due to my failure in sniping out the single entities, Kimmler and also the Vargolf, these Ironbreakers were carrying hard, grinding their way through the hordes of undead, especially the 8 units of Grave Gods. Thanks to the support of the characters Thorgrim, Runesmith and the Master Engineer, they were able to rack up over 4,200 value in the end. Now you might think, wait, Thorek has the Rune of Doom and Rune of Speed able to provide some massive attack buffs to Dawi units, so why don't we use him instead? Sure, Thorek's runes can give your Dawi army a lot more burst damage in a short period of time, but the problem is they come in short bursts, and Ironbreakers need something more consistent for a more prolonged period of time. Ironbreaker's strength comes from their unparalleled holding power, the ability to drag out a fight by shrugging off every single hit coming from their enemies. And throughout the slow grind, their melee attacks will slowly trickle in, accumulating damage in their opponent. They don't win their melee fights with burst damage, but by a battle of slow and steady attrition. And Thorgrim's buff is a reliable way to speed up this kind of attrition process. As for the other units you'd want to go with this build, I would say the Master Engineer is a must-have. Not only do they have flash bombs, a very useful debuff and slow, but also the ammo refill, topping up the explosive charges for the Ironbreakers, giving them a lot more potential damage output. The other hero choice would be a Runesmith or Gotrek. For the Runesmith, the Rune of Speed is very useful in buffing up their melee attack, providing the Ironbreakers and other dwarf troops, including Thorgrim, with a lot more melee attack. The Dwarven rune magic is also very versatile with different tools for dealing with different situations, with the Rune of Slowness and the Rune of Wrath and Ruin. Both of them are two very useful runes. However, if you are preparing to face off some giant terrifying monsters, Gotrek might be a better choice, as the Ironbreakers, Thorgrim, they both are not exactly great at dealing with big monsters. Just like here fighting the Lizardman, I actually brought Gotrek instead of the Runesmith, and he is responsible for cutting down the Lizardman's single entity monsters. In the end, the exact unit combo would really depend on what you expect from your opponent, whether they are going for a more infantry heavy build, where you would be benefiting more from bringing a Runesmith with the attack buffs and also the Rune of Wrath and Ruin to clear out blobs of infantry, especially when the Runesmith can synergize with the blasting charges, giving 20% fire weakness to units surrounding him. Or are you preparing yourself to go on monster hunting, where Gotrek would shine with his anti-large armor-piercing attacks? The choice would be up to you, the player yourself. Overall, this is a rather niche build, not the most competitive build, but definitely still works on quick battles. The other aspects of Thorgrim's buffing and debuffing also works well with the Ironbreakers, with the Oath of Vengeance reducing the melee defense of a targeted enemy unit, allowing the Ironbreakers to finish off whatever enemies that are left, resisting the retribution of the Dawi. And the High King ability also provide a map-wide base weapon damage buff, as well as map-wide immune to psychology, which is exactly what the Ironbreakers need, as they do not have the greatest weapon strength, and regular Ironbreakers do not have ITP. So really, what Thorgrim synergize best with are not hammers, but instead Ironbreakers who can hold for forever in melee combat, weathering the storm, using that permanent attack buff from Thorgrim to bolster their counter-attack damage. Now let's wrap up the whole video with a bit of a post-battle analysis. Now for the Dawi army, Thorgrim didn't get a lot of damage done, get quite a few kills despite everything, due to his really good splash attacks, but being sniped by a bunch of Shaptis with great bows, by a bunch of archers, especially the Blessed Legions, armor sundering, and also High Queen Kalida's armor piercing anti-large. He got hit pretty hard and got killed, although the damage on his HP does allow him to activate the High King buff early, buffing up the attacks of my infantry, allowing the Norgrimlings 218 kills, over 1800 damage value, impressive damage. Of course, part of that came from the blasting charges, but they were able to hold back numerous skeletons, including the elite tomb gods, using their superior armor and melee defense to tank out the damage, punching back with the buffed up attacks from the plus 18 melee attack from the High King, as well as the Great Book of Grudges. Also, the occasional Oath of Vengeance, debuffing the melee defense of their targets, provide a little bit more damage boost to these units. Now for the rest of the army, we have the Grumbling God getting some pretty decent value, cutting through a bunch of skeletons and Ushaptis, and the other Longbeards also getting some impressive damage, shutting down at least one of the Screaming Skull catapults, pushing off some of the archers, and in the end basically being a very solid melee unit, getting over 150 kills. As for the miners with blasting charges, they got rushed pretty hard by the Nekara horsemen as well as the skeleton infantry, not able to use up most of their blasting charges. So in the end, not a lot of value for these miners. As for the rangers, some of them managed to shoot at a bunch of targets, including the Nekara horsemen, shut down one of the Screaming Skull catapults, getting some value done, but with the infantry compromised and the lack of protection from the cavalry, they suffered some heavy losses. Now, Oathless Raiders, a very solid unit if you can actually get them in range and shoot at the key units of your enemies. Their armor-piercing throwing axes were great at shutting down High Queen Kalida, especially with the Marked by Othar ability, stripping away the missile resistance of the character. And in the end, their armor-piercing axes are also great at focusing down some of these Ushapti units. As for the characters, the Runesmith was not really there for damage dealing, instead using his debuff to improve the damage from the blasting charges, while the Master Engineer has been chugging in those flash bombs to debuff the melee defense of their opponents, and also using the armor-piercing missiles to shoot up some of the Ushaptis. Essentially, all these characters from the Dawi are the supporting units that the Dawi infantry needs to synergize with and turn the tide of battle. As for the Tomb King's army, skeleton infantry are skeletons, so not really much to say about them. While the Tomb Guards not being able to overpower the superior Norgrimlings Ironbreakers, they were not able to get too much damage as well. The skeleton archers did a lot better with the Blessed Legion, with the armor sundering really good at shooting at big armored units, say Thorgrim on his throne. As for the Nekara horsemen, some of them were able to charge into the miners and shut down some of the rangers, but in the end, taking so much losses in the melee grind, especially with the crossfire from the rangers, the casualties in the initial engagement prevented them from doing too much damage in the late game, while the Ushapti not really doing too much damage here, only able to push through the miners, but after that being pinned down by the Grumbling God, who have some really impressive melee defense. Their damage was rather limited, but the Ushapti with Great Bow shooting at Thorgrim, gaining so much value, and also the massive armor-piercing missile strength was able to shoot up a lot of my units. The Screaming Skull catapult didn't do too much damage, as the catapult was targeting miners instead of Ironbreakers, a massive mistake, and allowing my rangers to move into firing distance to shoot at these artillery. The Tomb King catapults got shut down early. Anyways, that's it for today's army build video. I hope you enjoy it, and if you want to see more of my content, remember to hit the like and subscribe down below to get notified every time I upload a new video. They will be covering topics including battle replays, wild army build like this one, occasional meme videos, and tips and strategies for Total War Warhammer multiplayer. And with Total War Warhammer 3 right around the corner, this is probably the last army build video I'm making for the game too. After that, I'll be probably doing more battle replays, especially when I still have some amazing replays that are collecting dust in the backlog sent in by dear viewers and competitive players. And yeah, that's basically it for today. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Tactical Lich, signing out.